Hey, grade 7s, lesson 3.4 here. The company by the bay. What was the importance of the creation of the Hudson's Bay Company? You know the story, you might even have the blankets at home. Let's find out. So stick around and let's learn something. Lesson 3.4, what was the importance of the creation of the Hudson's Bay Company? You know this company, you shop here, you might even have some of their blankets. You are very familiar with the Hudson's Bay Company, and we are going to take a look at its history here in North America as one of the world's oldest companies. So, the company by the bay. The Hudson's Bay started because of the massive demand that beaver fur had in Europe. And the imperial powers at the time, they were competing in North America. And the French and the British, who are our main competitors at this location, in this part of our story of Canada's history, they were fighting for territory, and they used the First Nations to their advantage to help each other out. So we're going to start with the Europeans exploring the Hudson's Bay. Now, Pierre Radisson and de Grossier, we remember this from chapter 2, as they were making their way over to Lake Superior. They heard of rumors from the First Nations that were living in the area of this vast sea in the very far north. And other coureurs de bois, they heard these rumors. Radisson and de Grossier heard these rumors, and they took this information and they went to the governor of New France with this information. But for some reason, the governor of New France was not interested. Now, the rumor was that there was this great sea to the north, and that there was an abundance of beaver pelt, beaver fur, which would have translated into a lot of money for the home countries, because fashion was driving this exploration. But for some reason, who knows why, I don't know why, and I couldn't find out why, the governor was not interested in this. Okay, no problem. Pierre Radisson and Sir de Grossier, they head over to Britain and they take that plan there, and all of a sudden that talk of an abundance of beaver fur, this was very interesting to the British merchants, and they were willing to pay for exploration. And that's exactly what happens. In 1668, 2 ships depart London, England, and they are making their way to Hudson Bay. And one of those ships, the one that had Radisson on it, had to return because of bad stormy weather. But the second one with de Grossier on it, made it to the bay. And they made it there, and they built a fort at Rupert River. And they stayed there that summer, and they stayed through the winter. And they traded with the local Cree and Innu population that was living there in and around that area. So as they're trading all winter long and getting all their stuff, they returned to England that following summer with a ship full of fur. Like, it's incredible how much fur that they were bringing. And this just proves that Radisson and Grossier were right, and that the rumors that they were hearing from the First Nations that they were working with and the other coureurs de bois that were in and around over in the interior were correct. And now the Hudson Bay is providing us with an ocean route right into the heart of the fur trade. Now, for the 1600s, 1700s, this is a huge deal, because how are you going to transport these goods? How are you going to do all this stuff? Well, you need access to water. And now we have an ocean route, a sea route that goes right into the heart of the fur trade, which is going to make somebody very, very rich. And that's what happens. The Hudson's Bay Company is formed. In 1670, the Hudson's Bay Company was formed. So a long time ago, and you can see that this is, when you look at these dates, that is our oldest company, one of the oldest companies in the entire world. And King Charles II grants a monopoly to the Hudson's Bay Company. And because the British were laying claim to wherever they went, just like what the French were, totally disregarding the First Nations that were living there, all of this land became known as Rupert's Land because Prince Rupert was the head of the Hudson's Bay Company. So King Charles II said to the Hudson's Bay, you can have Rupert's Land. And Rupert's Land is all of the land in western and northern Canada whose rivers flow into the Hudson Bay. And you see here on this map, that's a lot of land. And if the king is saying this is now your land, you can just see the dollar symbols like in the eyes of the Hudson's Bay Company. So this is going to be a really important business deal for the Hudson's Bay. But the Hudson's Bay, they weren't interested in building a colony. No, they were only interested in trading. So they built trading posts at the mouths of important rivers. And what would happen is the First Nations would then go to these forts and they would trade with the British, which we'll see in the next chapter. This is different than how the French traded with the First Nations. The French went out to the First Nations and the British waited for the First Nations to come to them. So there was no interest in building a colony. It was purely just for business. Okay. Now take a look at this map. That is a lot of land. That is a tremendous amount of land that is now being given to the Hudson's Bay. But you need to understand that there's still other people that are here. There's our First Nations groups. Many First Nation cultures are living within this area, as well as the French. And this makes the French mad. So now we've got a conflict happening at the Bay. And the French, in 1686, they attack these British forts, these trading posts that are there. And they are attacking from the interior of the continent and not from the sea. So they surprise attack the British, okay, using canoes. They go up the rivers and they are surprising the British this way. The British only are expecting any kind of attack really to be happening from the bay side, from the seaside. So these attacks are a surprise because they're caught off guard, and the very important forts at Rupert House, Moose Factory, and Albany Factory easily fall to the French. York Factory at the mouth of the Nelson River does remain British for some time after these initial attacks, but eventually it is taken by the French in 1697. And now the French have control of this area for quite some time until the Treaty of Utrecht comes around and is signed, which is ending some of the conflict that's happening in Europe. And as we learned from earlier, that if something is happening in Europe, it spills out into the colonies, which means if something is resolved in Europe, then technically, in air quotations, you can't see it, but I'm doing it, air quotations, it is then affecting the colonies. So the Treaty of Utrecht, we see Acadia being given to the British. We know this, and it gets renamed to Nova Scotia. But Rupert's Land is also returned to the British. Now, the conflict and the Treaty of Utrecht may have, paused the conflict in Europe, but Europe is a long way away in the 1700s. Okay, there's no planes, trains, automobiles, and things like that. So it's really, back then, it's really a long ways away. It's not just a 9-hour plane ride. So this conflict stays here in North America for at least another 50 years after that. And we will definitely be taking a much closer look at this conflict in future lessons. What I want you to do right now is head over to your notebook and complete the discussion questions for this part of the chapter.